In this Dragon's Dogma 2 video, we're going to be covering the Archer Vocation, which is one of the 4 basic vocations in the game, and we're going to go over everything you could possibly want to know about the Archer, what its role is in the group, what are good pawn pairings, how to use an Archer, how to use steady shot, what the different types of arrows are, how to manage your stamina, and of course what skills and equipment to use. So first, let's talk about the role of the Archer in the group. They are pure DPS characters. They do not have support tendencies like a mage. They don't have tank tendencies like a fighter. They are damage, and they're really great because what's good about them is they can take out flying enemies very easily or hit flying enemies very easily, and they can also aim for the weak spots of monsters rather effectively compared to some other characters in the game, making them able to really crank out the damage if you know what you're doing. Good pawn pairings or your main pawn pairing for this class can be really whatever you want. You know, your party composition is more important, so you can really select whatever you want here. You could pick fighter or mage. It's good to have one of either of those in your group, but you could also pick a thief if you want. It doesn't matter that much since you can always fill in what you need here. So let's jump into Archer basics and how to use an Archer in Dragon's Dogma. There are 2 different ways to attack with the Archer. One is just pressing the normal attack button, which will shoot an arrow at basically the nearest enemy. And then there is steady shot, which you use the R1 or RB button, depending on what your controller is. This is the default setup. You can change this, but this is going to allow you to effectively aim your shot manually. The other way is done automatically, and it'll try and track the target as best as it can. But if it's a highly mobile target like a wolf or maybe like a harpy, sometimes it might miss. So aiming manually is far better than attacking by default, in my opinion. And it's not only because the tracking is better, but also because steady shot tends to do more damage than the regular R1 attacks, because you can aim for the weak spots of enemies. Like you can shoot goblins or humans or, cyclopses in the face, or, even other enemies like griffins, etc., where they're weaker in the head and deal more damage per shot than if you're just using the basic attack. So if you're playing an Archer, you should really learn to use steady shot. And if you're finding that you're really struggling with Archer, it's probably because you're not using steady shot enough. And if it's not inherently clear, you simply use steady shot by pressing the R1 button and holding it till your bow's drawn back and then letting it go. And you can let it go early. It won't go as far or deal as much damage, so you want to try and charge it up as much as you can. And you can also use steady shot with skills. If you hold R1 and then hit the skill button, which is L1 or left bumper, and then press a skill, you can fire a lot of your skills off from steady shot to manually aim them for more effectiveness, like at heads and things like that. So you should get in the habit of doing that a lot of the time as well. Now, obviously, the downside of steady shot is that if an enemy is coming at you or is close to you, it takes a second to get out of that camera angle and back into your regular third-person perspective. So you want to be, very careful about when you're using this. So positioning your Archer away from enemies where you can use this effectively is very, very important. Additionally, you can melee with the Y button or triangle button, depending on the controller that you're using. And this is something you should try and avoid using, but only using it in a pinch if necessary. But do keep in mind that, if you knock a harpy out of the air or something when it's not dead, you can walk up to it and press Y or triangle, and you will finish it off. So that's a good thing to know as well. And the last thing in terms of archery basics I want to mention is that there are different arrow types in the game that you can get. These are not super common, but there are different ones with different effects, and these are tied to certain skills that you'll get as you play an Archer, and you'll need that ammunition type in your inventory in order to use those skills. So if you want to use, for instance, like exploding shot, you're going to have explosive arrows in your inventory. Otherwise, when you go to use that skill, you won't be able to because you need that ammo for it. So you should spend a minute and familiarize yourself with what these arrows do and their status effects, and also realize that you can craft a lot of these from materials that you pick up around the landscape. So obviously, as you use your skills and stuff in combat, you're going to chew through your stamina, and managing stamina on an Archer seems like it's really bad when you first start playing. It's kind of, when you first start playing Archer, in my opinion, in this game, you don't know how to play it correctly, and you go through your stamina really, really quickly, and it can be very difficult. But after you really learn how to play an Archer, Archers have some of the easiest stamina management in the game because you're using steady shots so reliably and so regularly, and it doesn't cost any stamina unless you pair it with a skill. You're going to be using it a lot of the time, and you don't really have to worry too much about stamina management on an Archer. However, there are things you can do to help improve your stamina management, which is don't sprint in combat unless you need to sprint. A lot of times I find as an Archer that I pull aggro and I need to sprint out of the way, so make sure you do that. But make sure that, you're not just sprinting around if you don't need to. It's less important on an Archer because you tend to have more stamina, but it's something that can help. And also, make sure that you use steady shot all the time when you're fighting, because it doesn't cost any stamina. So a good way to manage your stamina is by using this attack effectively. And also, you know, larger characters are going to have more stamina, and smaller characters are going to have less, but it will regenerate quickly. So the size of your archer isn't super important for this build, simply because you don't have stamina problems to begin with. Moving along to the skills that I like to use on my archer, let's talk about barrage shot first. This is a skill that fires a couple arrows, and later when you upgrade it, it will fire 3 arrows that are like double knocked effectively. So it does decent burst damage. However, the problem that I find is that unless you're using this attack while you're in steady shot, you just do almost the same damage as one steady shot that hits a weak spot of an enemy. So it's not really stamina efficient. And also when you're using it, when you're in steady shot, it's hard to land all the arrows into the head of the enemy or weak spot of an enemy, because they tend to move, and the shots are kind of like delayed, like boom, boom, boom. And you have to keep the reticle on where that weak spot is for each one of those bursts, which can be kind of difficult. It's good early on, but you'll probably want to swap it out for torrent shot later. And when you get torrent shot, effectively what this does is it works really well when you're using it with steady shot, right? When you're aiming it manually, and you can just get positioned back, and then you can just unload a lot of arrows into a target. This works really well when you're buffed with, like, you know, flame affinity or fire affinity or something like that, because you can tend to set enemies on fire really quickly. Or maybe when you've knocked an enemy down, you can just load into their face where they're down on the ground and they can't do anything. This is really good. You want to swap this with barrage shot and use this once you gain for more familiarity with the archer and you've unlocked this. And obviously you'll upgrade this over time as well, so that it's even more effective. Deadly Shot is another really good skill for knockdowns. If you want to play an archer that helps with knockdowns, like maybe you have a party that focuses on it, you got a warrior in your party, Deadly Shot is really good, and it can help knock an enemy down. The problem with it is you got to have good spacing, because it takes a really long time to use, and you also have to have really good timing, because you want to try and time your Deadly Shot to let go of the button when you're in steady shot the second it flashes, and the screen will kind of slow down if you nailed it perfectly for more effectiveness. So it can be kind of hard to use in the thick of combat, and also it takes a lot of practice to get that timing down consistently. I've been playing Archer a lot, and even I mess it up probably 50% of the time. So even though it's a really good skill, it can be difficult to use. Beyond that, you're going to want to have one status effect arrow type on your bar, which is either probably going to be Exploding Shot or Blighting Shot, but it can be any of them. Exploding Shot is a very, very deadly skill. If you can land this on the weak spot of an enemy and it explodes, it's going to hit for massive damage. You should really save these arrows for tough to kill enemies like griffins or dragons or something with a lot of health bars, because this is where you're going to really need those. And Blighting Shot can help deal damage over time to tougher enemies. So again, you want to save it for those tough enemies. And in your fourth slot, you can put whatever you want here. There is a skill that you'll get later on in the game that I'll refrain from mentioning here from spoilers that's good for this slot. But effectively, when you're leveling and stuff like that, any other skill that you really like, you can put in here. Augment-wise, you really want anything you can get that increases your damage. Lethality is really good on archers because it increases the damage to weak spots, which is where you're hitting enemies a lot of the time anyway. You'll hear a little sound, by the way, when you hit enemy weak spots. It's very audible, so you'll know when you're hitting them. Otherwise, you can add things that improve stamina or reduce the damage you take or increase your mobility or your movement or something like that. You don't, again, really have stamina issues with an archer. Stamina is not as important, but you really want to just look out for things that make your life easier, mostly by increasing your damage. And then equipment-wise, there's a couple things you can do. First of all, on your rings, you want to look for damage. Anything that increases your damage. If you do the archer quest, there's like a bow quest early on in the game. You will be rewarded with a ring that increases your damage the closer you are to targets. You're not trying to be close to targets, but it does happen sometimes that'll increase your damage there. That's a good thing to get. And basically any rings that increase your damage. And also when you upgrade your bows, you can upgrade them a couple different ways. And you can focus on knockdown power if you want to go for knockdowns with Deadly Shot, or you can just focus on outright damage, which is what I prefer. Because if you kill enemies, then you don't have to worry about knocking them down so much. So that wraps up our video on Archer. I'll just mention one tip too here is that if you're playing with an Archer and you find that you're pulling aggro all the time, which is what happens to me, make sure that your fighter pawn has the shield summon skill to help hold aggro on targets a lot more easily. Otherwise, you might find that you're dodging targets. It's not so hard to dodge enemies all the time, in my opinion, but it just might make it easier for you if they have that skill. So that wraps up our Vocation guide for Archer. I hope you found these tips helpful and it's something that can help you get through the game. Again, if there are tips that I missed, leave them in the comments. And if you have questions, leave them there as well. And I will answer them as soon as I can.